Hi, everyone. Welcome to White Coats at the Round Table, a healthcare podcast focused on career development, burnout prevention, and non-clinical or atypical career paths. My name is Mike Asbeck, and I'm joined, as always, by John McDonald. John,
Yo,
good morning.
what's going on, dude?
Not much. I think you are less tired than I am. So I
Yeah.
will prep the audience. I'm functioning on 3 hours of sleep. I had a flight delay last night coming back home. So I rolled in at 3 a.m. and then, of course, in my brilliance, had patients starting at 7 a.m. So
It's
yeah,
unbelievable.
lots of fun. But this is the trade off for the life that I choose to live. So I won't complain.
I mean, yeah, you were not going to complain.
Yeah, I spent a weekend in Denver. It was lovely.
What
So
did you do there? Let's hear about that.
so it was a fun trip. I'm a big fan of workations. So I went out there, and then Friday and Saturday I had a work meeting for a pharmaceutical company that went really well. And then Saturday afternoon we just what did we do Saturday afternoon? I don't
I
remember.
wasn't I wasn't
Anyways,
there.
I know you weren't there. Saturday afternoon, my wife and I explored, I think, downtown Denver, if I'm remembering. And then Sunday and Monday, we went up to Rocky Mountain National Park and did some hiking, had a cabin with an incredible mountain view. So it was a nice way to unplug and get away from the kids. So it was really good, minus the flight delay that got us in at 3 a.m.
Yeah, that is. I mean, honestly, if it was me, Mike, I don't know if I would power through. I might have been like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've got sickness. I can't go down this morning."
Well, this is actually a great conversation to have, not the direction we meant to go, but this is the tough thing with healthcare, right? Is my schedule is generally set in stone 3 to 4 months out in advance because I'm outpatient and I'm scheduling patients. So, yes, I can call in. Yes, I can take days off, but at the same time when I do, it's an incredible disruption because you have patients that are coming in that, have set up time away from work, have set up childcare to come in. So I always try and be very, very careful. My threshold to disrupt my patient schedule is always very high, especially if it's last minute, knowing that it's going to have a huge impact on 20 plus people. So I try to be careful with that, even like sickness. I know post COVID, we're much more mindful of that and maybe not trying to power through, but I'm always very guilt stricken if I have to disrupt my patients and have them get rescheduled.
Yeah, I can tell you on the other end, I just had a customer yesterday that said, "Yeah, I've got this psychiatrist, and it's really difficult because they cancel every other." I was like, "Oh goodness, I'm."
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I do cancel a fair bit because with consulting and stuff, I may have someone, if I book a follow up visit 4 or 5 months out, then if I
Yeah,
have a gig or something that I get that may get canceled. But I try, if it's under a month, I try and be really mindful of not canceling patients less than a month out. But yeah, I'm guilty of rescheduling people too. So I can't pretend I'm holier than thou. Well, what do you want to talk about today, John?
so we were going to talk about. I'm going to tease the next episode because we were talking about coffee, getting caffeined up and all that. And I had been talking about the Huberman method and avoiding caffeine for 90 minutes after you wake up. Um, and we are going to try and argue that next week, but I still
Once
have
I
not
get more
had my
sleep.
coffee. Well, that's the thing. I've got
Yes. Yeah.
water right now. So
We're gonna push that argument to a day where we both are at our cognitive peak.
yeah, yeah. So that
Excellent.
was going to be this week, but um, I I thought it would be a good idea to talk about difficult bosses, or if you've ever seen that movie Horrible Bosses. I don't think I've ever had any management quite like what you see in the movie Horrible Bosses, but I've had difficult employers and management that I've worked under before. So I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about how to deal with difficult workplaces, especially a manager, a boss, or even maybe a colleague
I
that's
like it.
difficult to work with.
It's such a great topic because as we're talking about career development, very often career development may be occurring within your current organization. I think the most common path for healthcare providers in terms of career progression is you go from being a full-time clinician within your current employment to starting to take on some additional roles, whether that be research, sitting on committees, doing more administrative tasks. I think that is usually the path forward for people. And then maybe you evolve that into a non-clinical role or a career pivot. Or maybe in a case like even mine, it ends up just being something where your day-to-day role is more diversified than just 40 hours of patient care. But within that, I think that also means that if the most common path for healthcare providers or healthcare professionals is to progress or develop within a singular organization, that also means that you have to deal with people. And if you have difficult bosses or difficult administration, it's something where you can't just cut and run. And I think in healthcare, especially, that it can be challenging because we can't jump from job to job. I know we talked about this with Madison a couple of weeks ago, that healthcare is maybe a role where you do need to stay in a job longer than just 1 to 2 years. Where if you were an engineer or in marketing, if you were job hopping, it's not as much of a negative. But in healthcare, I think you do need to have a little bit more longitudinal staying power. So that means the need to deal with difficult people is going to be even greater.
100%. And again, I'm going to reiterate that you and I have probably both dealt with difficult management in one aspect or another, even if it was a preceptor or anybody who has some sort of authority over you. So I would like to start by maybe a little story time. I don't know if you've got something offhand, but I've got a few things that we could discuss. But let's set the stage first. There are a few articles that I was looking up about how to deal with difficult bosses, or do you hate your boss? I mean, the Harvard Business Review had a really good article about this. Um, but the themes that I keep on coming up with, or going over, reading about, is that you will have difficult management. It's going to happen, and there have to be tactics you work on to get through it. Um, Now, let's just start with a little story time. I've had some difficult management in the past. Let's give one of these stories. So, I don't mind talking about this because I don't work for these people anymore, and it was a bad situation. And uh, we'll just say it's a big box retailer. So I may have told this story before, Mike, but when I first became a pharmacist, I was floating, and for those of you who don't know what that means, I'm sure you do, but floating, we would travel across the whole division, even outside of divisions, traveling sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours to get to our job site. Then you would work 10 to 12 hours. Well, I had showed up to a location that was about an hour and a half away from my house. I get there, I was covering a short term leave from what I was told, at least. And somebody came in to say hi to me that day, even though I hadn't never been there. And it was the store manager. I said, hey, I just wanted to come in. It's my day off. I just wanted to congratulate you on the new position. And I was like, what are you talking about? I said, I'm a floater. I'm just covering right now. Like, oh, no, you're the new manager. What? Turns out my division manager had told the store manager that they were promoting me to a pharmacy manager. Didn't tell me about it. And this place was an hour and a half away from my house. Um, that would qualify as bad management because I ended up getting a call after there's so much confusion, and the guy says, "Oh yeah, oh I'm sorry, I was gonna come and talk to you about that, and sorry that it came out this way." Man, did that put a really bad taste in my mouth, and it just went from there. Now, that is a wild story because I stayed there for a year and a half, Mike,
I was
and
going to ask the follow
yeah.
up of when you started job hunting after that.
Well, it wasn't until I had asked to be moved to a store that was probably 5 minutes from where I lived, and there was a staff position that opened up. So I asked them, uh, can you demote me? Really, I want to be a staff pharmacist. I don't want to drive far, and I know there's a position to open up. And the guy says, "Yeah, sorry, can't do that because I'd have to demote you, and I have to give reason as to why. So I can't do that. Sorry." And it was at that moment that I started really, really looking because I had a brand new kid and I was driving an hour and a half each way to and from work for 12-hour shifts.
Yeah, that's
So
awful.
yeah,
Quality of life killer.
it really was. But the thing is, I did not know how to set boundaries. Didn't know how to advocate for myself, and I didn't know what I don't want to say what rights, but the leverage that you have as an employee discussing these things with your management. So yeah, I had to learn.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any personal stories, in part because I'm still working at my employer, and I wouldn't want to necessarily
Yeah.
talk about conflicts and things. But I think I would actually take a different perspective. When I think about bad bosses, I think sometimes what happens here, the power dynamics are. I think you alluded to it, and that really is what is fresh on my mind. Is that so often in American culture, especially where we celebrate work, where we maybe at times overemphasize work, we also put our bosses in a position where I think that power dynamic just ends up being very advantageous to the employer and not to the employee. And I think how that presents as the employer or the boss asking you to do things that are above and beyond your job description, or continuing to grow in terms of scope and responsibility. And then the reward for that is exposure or future growth opportunities, and not necessarily a change in compensation or a change in title. And the way that I approach my job, I actually love it. And it's certainly not for everyone, but I am very transactional with all the work that I do. My job is not my family. I have a family. My family loves me. I don't expect or need my job to love me. I'm here to make money. I'm here to care for patients in the best possible way I can. And because I don't necessarily look at my job as a place where I'm looking for, acceptance, affirmation, love, things like that, I also feel like that relationship is maybe a little bit more transactionally focused in both directions, where I'm comfortable telling my job, nope, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not going to, stay late, or I'm not going to do this or that. And in exchange, they also, I think, will ask me things. And if I say yes or if I say no, there's not hard feelings lost, because there's just this kind of mutual understanding that the job is more transactional and not relational, or not built on the idea that we care for each other or that we're a family.
Mm,
And I think that's really helpful, because when I think of bad bosses, I think very often of exactly what you just described, is where a boss is maybe taking advantage of an employee situation where the employee feels they can't say no. The employee feels that if they say no, they may hurt or impair future growth opportunities. And then the employer is taking advantage of that and continuing to squeeze more productivity, continuing to squeeze more out of the employee, knowing that the employee is maybe disadvantaged where they can't say no. And this is a tough thing. I know I'm going on a bit of a rant here, because this is not the exact same in my mind as when we were talking about the residency training and residents saying, no, I'm not working overnight shifts, and discomfort is harmful to my moral psyche. But I think there is a balance. I work really hard when I'm at my job. So it's not that I'm slacking, but at the same time, I'm also not going to do more than what my job duties are, my responsibilities, because I think scope creep, especially in the healthcare profession, where we are asked to be managers when we don't want to be or when we're not expected to. We're asked to stay late to send scripts, or we're asked to see patients in our admin time and then just do notes from home. I think there's always going to be scope creep like that. So pushing back or having boundaries is a little bit easier, and maybe makes those relationships or those transactions with your boss less contentious if you take a more transactional approach to your job.
yeah, and I know that can be difficult because especially when you are a people pleaser or you are a people person, to set boundaries is difficult,
Mm-hmm.
especially with your management because there is that fear. If I try to push back at all, does that put my job at risk?
Right.
You
No,
know.
absolutely. It's hard. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it may put your job at risk.
Hmm.
It's not one of these things where every boss is a great person and every job is a great job. And if you set boundaries, they're going to celebrate that you're doing a good job advocating for yourself. Very often, you may have a job where if you're telling them, no, I'm not staying late today. No, I'm not seeing patients over my lunch or over my admin. I need that time to catch up. that may impair you. I would argue then in those cases, that's time to start looking for another job. I think we're blessed in healthcare that most people listening to this podcast can find alternate employment. I don't want to say easily, but within some period of time, you can find another job. There's such a shortage of healthcare professionals
Hmm.
that I think sometimes there's also a fear because we are comfortable with what we know. And even if the job situation is not perfect, we know what it is. We know what to expect when we come in. And it can be scary to jump into the unknown of a job where maybe it's not better. Maybe you go to the new job and it's even worse. But I think if it's a situation where you feel like you're not able to set those boundaries or advocate for yourself, that's probably an indicator that it's time to leave.
Now, this is a question that came up when I was reading this Harvard Business Review article. I'm not going to set it up though, Mike. When is it appropriate to go to HR about your manager or your boss? This isn't a necessarily a leading question,
Mm-hmm.
but I was kind of surprised at what Harvard said.
So I would take the military approach that
Hmm.
every problem is best solved at the lowest level of delegation possible.
Hmm.
So I think politics is all local. If you are completely out of options to address it at the lowest level of management possible, then you escalate it. But I think everyone should be aware that the second you escalate it, that probably means, I mean, that's kind of like the nuclear option. If you're going to HR about your boss, that also means that you are likely moving to a different department or
Hmm.
looking for a new job very quickly because that's going to be very difficult to come back from.
Yeah.
So it's necessary. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but just I think I've seen scenarios play out here at my job in both cases where people went to HR for stupid stuff and it forever irreparably harmed the working relationship. And I've also seen people go to HR far too late in the process when they probably should have involved HR much earlier on because the situation was just not improving and was really detrimental to the work environment. So there's no right formula, but just be aware that when you go to HR, that's probably a one-way road.
Yeah, you hit it right on the nose, Mike. Of course you did.
Oh, thank you.
That's exactly what Harvard said. It was generally lodging a formal complaint is the last resort option, uh, quite literally the nuclear option, because not only could it hurt your prospective relationships at that job, make things difficult more than they could be because you could solve it at the lower level, but prospecting for jobs in the future could, even if they shouldn't, even if you were completely in the right, it may harm your prospects in the future because healthcare is a very small community on the local level and professionally.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder that in healthcare, it is a small community. Even if you're in a big city, if you're working in a medical specialty, or even if you're in primary care, there's not a lot of us. So everyone's going to have a connection. Everyone's going to know somebody. And it really, I think, is a good approach to life to just never leave a job on poor terms.
Hmm.
And even if you hate your manager, even if your boss sucks, I think it makes sense to do everything that you can to try and preserve that relationship and then just leave.
Hmm.
Don't burn the bridges, don't give the middle finger on the way out, don't give some big long epic speech about how disgruntled you are on your way out, but leave gracefully because you never know when you're going to encounter that person again, you never know when you're going to encounter that employer again.
Hmm.
10 years down the road, maybe you're in management and all of a sudden you're circling back around to that very job that you left as a clinician, and it's going to be much harder to see that as a job opportunity if you double birded them on the way out the door.
I'm going to give another example of a difficult boss. I wouldn't say a horrible boss, but a boss who liked to manage by meetings.
Manage your
Uh,
meetings
Managed by
by
meetings.
meetings. Okay.
So loved to be in meetings. Didn't really like to do their job. You know what I mean? So yeah, this individual was difficult to work with because we just had a personality conflict, and there was this air of I love meetings, and I'm not going to be in the department to support my people. Um, and this is general enough where nobody's going to be able to track this, so I feel good about it. Um, but the problem that I have is being a people pleaser. I tend to do things that I normally wouldn't do just to make sure we keep the peace, right? One of the benefits that I find though is I have such a keen sense of how people respond to me. Um, I'm very aware of my surroundings. So I know that we weren't really meshing very well. But what I have decided to do when I encounter these types of individuals, these bosses, these management figures, is take things off their plate. I've found that when you align with your management's goals, what they want, and they see that you're trying to support them, man, life gets easier. It's gotten easier every single time. Um, and it is something that I have to kind of put my pride behind me and just say, like, I know that this works. Um, I know that I should be supporting the management. If this is what they want to do, I really should just be going along with our plan, because at the end of the day, just like you said, Mike, you have to work your job profile. Um, it's not our job to decide what the organizational goals are. It's our job to try and execute their plans,
Mhm.
right? So that's one thing we all have to choke down, is saying, even though we think we might have the better option, if you've aired those, or if you have the ability um, to give suggestions and it's just not going through, and you're not really getting traction, it's still not your job to come up with those solutions. It's the organizational's job to do that, and you're supposed to just answer the call. um, so what I found is aligning to my boss, finding out what motivates my management, and trying my best to take some of their work off their plate. I always try to find something that they need and say, "Hey, can I do this for you from now on?" So it'll free you up to do these other things. Every single time, whether or not I like the individual or they like me, we always end up having a great working relationship, because I'm trying to make their life easier. So it's not about whether you like the person or not, I don't think. It's about trying to make sure that you're showing your management that you're there to support the team. And if you can prove that, life is usually going to be easier.
It's such a great point. We so often, I think, have empowered ourselves to feel like we should speak up or we should say something if we think the organization is going in the wrong direction. And I think in some cases that's appropriate, but I think that you're right. In a lot of cases, if we are part of a clinical team, as a healthcare professional, and we feel things are going in the wrong direction, it's not necessarily going to be beneficial or good for us to try to be the stick in the mud, or the one that's saying, no, 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 this is wrong, this is wrong, this is screwed up. I think there's a role for us to play, and everybody needs to be a team player. And even if you don't agree with the direction, I think it's really important that you are supporting the team. And if the direction that the team is going is wrong because management is doing it wrong, then you would hope that the organization would recognize that and then make changes. But I think that if you have a team of 10 people and 8 of them think that it should be done in a different direction or a different way, and then are constantly raising concerns or raising issues, that's not going to lead to an effective team. So I think that's right, and I love that, because that's very military, right? Is it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter if the orders are ones you disagree with, unless you feel they are unlawful, then it is your duty to follow the order and carry it out to the best of your ability. If it's an unlawful order, then you have an ethical obligation to resist it. And I think that's actually the same in healthcare. If you are being told to do something that is unethical or unlawful, I think as a healthcare professional, it's our duty to stand up and say, no, I'm not doing this. If it is you are, being instructed to do something that is just not in the direction that you think the organization should go, well, I think your role as part of the team is to carry out that instruction or order, and then hope that if it's wrong, that the leadership team will recognize it, or the leadership team will be changed.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting as you bring this up, because I've learned a lot of this, or I've really had a lot of really good experience with this through my position with the New York PA Association. So I'm the chair of industry relations, which is a chair position. So it's not an elected position. It is an appointed position by the president. So it's really interesting because I am not elected. So the membership has not had any say in who serves in this role. It's a position that is subservient to the president and the board. And as a result, my role is to serve at the pleasure of the board. So it's not my job as the chair of industry relations to, say, I don't agree with the direction of the board or I don't agree with this decision. I'm not a voting member. The membership did not put me in a position to be a voting member. So I take my marching orders from the board and I carry it out at the pleasure of the board. And if the board feels I'm not doing a good job, they can replace me at any time. But if I disagreed with the direction of the board or disagreed with something that was going on, my role would not be to resist. My role would not necessarily be to refuse, but rather resign. My only recourse would be to resign from my position if I really thought something bad was happening or I thought the direction was a bad one. But really, the role is to take my marching orders from the board and then carry out their orders because the board is functioning as a fiduciary of the membership. So it's a really interesting thing when you get into like the nonprofit space or boards where I think that structure that you're describing is really set up, but it's very formal and rigid in a nonprofit setting like that.
Well, I think you're alluding to power structure as well, where there's that false power structure viewpoint where your employer has all the power when it really is a contract. We're agreeing to work a certain position, job, time, and they have contractually obligated to pay you for that time. So there isn't really power, even though it seems like that. If you can
Mm-hmm.
always leave a job. Um,
Correct.
and I think that's what point I want to get to is there could be a point where you do leave your job based off of management, and that is appropriate. But I think it is well documented that the saying isn't going to be new for many of you listening, but people don't leave bad jobs; people leave bad bosses. Have you heard that term before?
I've heard it. Yeah.
So, which is completely true. When I reflect back of times I've hated my work and what I've been doing, when I'm in a healthy mind space and when I've gotten out of what I would consider a toxic environment for at least myself, looking back, I know that I said, man, it's this company. This company sucks. Uh, I don't ever want to work for this company again. But uh, looking back with different eyes, it's like, oh, maybe it was just my boss. Maybe it was the management. Maybe it was that person, and they were going through a really tough time. You know, because looking back now, like there are people that I could not stand, and then I found out they were going through some really
Mm-hmm.
rough stuff in their life, and it was just coming through their job. It's like, oh, they're actually a decent person, and they weren't dealing with stress well. So like we are all human. This false power thing that comes up, it's like we all have choices to be at work or not. We all have choices to act a certain way and to respond a certain way. I feel like I'm talking to my kid right now, but like it's your choice how to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think the same psychological concepts that we use in parenting are appropriate for adults too. It's not that we're coddling adults by saying that, but rather that just being decent to people,
mhm,
not attributing malice when something else might be going on is a really good approach. And sometimes we lose that. I think it's hard when we feel like we are being unfairly targeted or we feel that we're being asked to do things that are maybe unfair compared to our expectations. But at the same time, even in those scenarios, like you just said, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what that person is going through. We don't know what the organization is going through. It might be something where feel really unfair, and it may just be because there's something happening on a broader organizational level that is out of everyone's control.
mhm,
Doesn't make it right. We don't say, hey, you're going to see 10 extra patients per week because the organization's going bankrupt. But at the same time, in that same scenario, if management came to me and said, the company is really struggling and we need everyone to see an extra 10 per day, we can't pay you any extra to do it right now, but we can assure you that if we get through this, we're going to renegotiate compensation.
mhm,
There's no obligation for you as an employee to say, yes, I'll do that. But if management came to you and said that, that gives you a decision point to then say, okay, do I leave? Do I find a different job if I feel that that's an unreasonable request, or do I do it? And
mhm.
then if they don't follow through with their side of it to renegotiate or anything, then you deal with it then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like it. I think it's really, in my mind, the way that we can boil this down is that it sounds like dealing with a bad boss comes down to how you are going to have a relationship with work.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be someone that is completely all consumed by your job and your entire meaning and purpose is driven by your employer's view of you, your employer's view of your success? Or is it something where your identity is diversified, both personally and career wise, where if you have a difficult boss, it's maybe annoying. It's not the greatest since you spend a lot of time at work, but it's also not something that's going to completely wreck your personal identity because you have other things that you identify with.
Mm. Do we have time for one more little
I love it. Yeah,
snippet?
keep
Okay.
giving anecdotes because I don't have any former employers to give anecdotes for, and
The
I
nice,
all
yeah.
of my coworkers are loyal listeners to the show. So if I'm like this one time, my boss, then
This
Dr.
this
Capote's going to come
person,
in and be
yeah.
like, "That was really mean of you." So,
This gentleman with short hair likes to. Don't want to give any identifiers.
but
Um.
truly, with that, just before your last story, I think in my job, I've been in the same role for 12 years. I don't necessarily think that there's been any times where I've had a bad boss.
Sure.
There's been plenty of times where we've had disagreements or differences of opinion, or even, I would even say, conflict to some degree. But it's always been something that has been, we were able to negotiate through it or navigate through it. And I think in part because we are both transparent about our goals,
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a misalignment of what we're both trying to achieve. And I really appreciate that about my job where we have a really good understanding. And I think that helps. But there's always going to be stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's almost like a marriage, right? If you're at the same job for 12 years, there's going to be times where you're annoyed with each other. There's going to be times where things are really good. And there's going to be times where things are maybe not so good. But I think the key is the communication, but then the relationship that you define or you decide that you want to have with your job.
And of course, personalities have a lot to do with it, Mike. You and I,
Huge, yeah.
anybody listening can tell that you and I have different personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So you have carried a bit more of a professional air about you probably earlier than I did. It took me a while to get to that point, and still at work, like I am not a stoic person at all. I will bring as much jokes, fun into my work as I possibly can. Um, within appropriate measures. But uh, it took me a while to set boundaries because I like to be people's friends. Uh, Not that you don't, but you are much better at setting boundaries earlier on in your life than I was, for
Well,
sure.
I don't want to be people's friends.
No, I know you hardly even want to be mine, but um,
Truly though, I tell my employees this. Like I pride myself on having a very distinct boundary between
mhm,
work relationships and personal relationships. In part, I don't want my coworkers to be my friends because I think it gets awkward then if things aren't going well at work and then all of a
mhm,
sudden that's impacting your personal friendships. But also because I really like having that segmented. If I ever leave my job or go to a different role, I'm not losing my personal social safety net or my personal connections as well. I think having those segmented for me is a really important thing. So I joke with my coworkers here. It's like, I'm not your friend.
yeah,
If you guys left for a different job, we probably would not keep in touch. And that's my definition of friendship is would I keep
you're
in
so
touch with you
funny.
after you left? Yeah. So anyways, go ahead. Tell your
No,
personal
no,
story.
yeah, no, you're so funny because I find myself anytime I leave a place, I'm like, oh, I'll come visit, and
No,
I've
but
got
you
finally
don't, right?
no, but it
Yeah.
finally gotten to the point in my life where I stopped saying that to people, and I
Hmm.
actually said, listen, I could say I'm gonna come visit a lot. If I'm around in the area I'm here, I'll come say hi, but I'm not
Yeah.
gonna go out of my way.
I'm just saying the quiet part out loud.
That's so
You
funny.
know, good luck at your next role. I will never see you again.
All right, this is gonna be a little switch, and we'll end on this one. This isn't necessarily a horrible boss, but this is when you have to manage up. When things are a little bit unclear of how to handle a situation. So I'm going to give you a story and maybe we can riff off of that. So I was working with an individual. He was one of the ones that, I mean, he or she was one of the ones, just joking, was one of the ones that uh, I had a pretty good relationship with, but they also really like to manage up. And as a tactic of work, I don't like that. I only like to manage up when it's absolutely necessary. But one of the things that had come up was this person started having a close relationship with one of their employees. Not bad at all. It's just they were the ones always talking, right? They would stand next to each other. They would work. They would laugh. And what ended up happening was when those people weren't around, I would hear people gossiping, or people would try to talk to me and be like, are they together? Like, I thought that guy was married. Are they together outside of work? Like, it started getting weird, right? That wasn't even happening. That was just people's imaginations. But I saw the writing on the wall, and I saw, if they keep on going this direction, people are going to get upset. They're going to continue the rumor mill, and maybe something's going to blow up when it never should have in the first place. So I pull my manager out, and I was a little bit younger, but I felt, I wanted to protect this person. So I said, "Hey, just so you know, a bunch of people are talking, and for lack of better terms, they think that you like this individual, and it's getting weird for them. They think that you guys are an item of some sort. I need you to be careful because I know that's not what's going on. It's the perception, and it's only going to breed resentment and problems in the pharmacy. So you have to back off of that person. You have to stop making it seem like it's preferential treatment, even if it's not." It was such an awkward conversation, Mike. It was so weird, but I'm glad I did it
Mm-hmm.
because I think he appreciated it, even if it was very awkward for him. I mean, if my employee came and told me that, I would feel devastated. I'd be like, oh my God, are people talking about this? Like, I'd be embarrassed. However, it did save it from future stuff because it stopped right away, and we have a great relationship now. I mean, this boss, because it was all there was no emotion behind it. It was all, this is what's happening. I care about you. I don't want it to look this way. Let's fix this thing. And because I came with that attitude, things did adjust. However, I want to know how you would have handled a situation like that, because you might say, "Nah, I would not approach that with a 10-foot pole. Let them make their bed; they can sleep in it." It's a tough one. I
Yeah,
was
it
I
is a
was
tough one,
younger. I was
right?
younger, so
I think if I'm interpreting the story correctly, the person did not realize that the office was perceiving the relationship this way, correct?
correct.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's actually it's a good example of keying someone in, because sometimes you don't recognize what the relationship looks like or what the interaction looks like to the outside. And I think it's really important when we're talking about um, interactions that could be viewed or interpreted as flirtatious or beyond a workplace interaction. But even aside from, oh my goodness, they're married, or is that inappropriate? I think even just if you have close friendships in the office, if you broaden this example out, if you are a manager and you are really, really tight with some subordinates but not the others, that can be really sketchy, because that can lead to resentment, or it can lead to perception of favoritism, even if it's not there. So I think my takeaway, or my summary of that example that you gave, and I'm so glad you did, because I think it's a great thought experiment, is that whether you're in a management role, or even if you are just working within the context of a team, which is every single one of us in healthcare, it's really important for us to be mindful of our interactions with our coworkers, with our superiors, with our subordinates, because our interactions do matter and people are noticing them. People are observing them, and they certainly can have an impact on how the team functions. Those inter-team dynamics really do matter. So making sure that you are not, too buddy buddy with the team, where then if you need to give corrective criticism, you're not able to. Making sure that you are not BFFs with some part of the team, and you're going out with drinks with them, and then all of a sudden it becomes a favoritism concern. Or on the more extreme example, making sure that you're not having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate where there is a power dynamic, where
Hmm.
maybe you as a manager are putting someone who's younger in a position where consent is difficult because of the power dynamics of subordinate versus employee, or
It
versus
never works
management.
out right. It never works out like you think
No,
it's going to work out on everybody.
exactly. So yeah,
uh,
it's a great example, and maybe a little bit different from what we're talking about of bad bosses, but I think just
sure.
relationships with
Hmm.
work and how you approach your relationship with work, but also with your employees matters. And I guess the takeaway from this is just to be mindful, not that there's a right or wrong answer, but these are things that we want to be introspective about and make sure that we're thinking about and intentional in how we play it out on in and day out in our jobs.
Yeah, we're all going to come into difficult relationships, whether it's a colleague or a manager. A lot of times you're going to be handling it the same exact way because the power dynamic with a colleague, you don't have power over it. So you really have to manage from behind, right? Uh, that's a common theme in many of these business oriented self help books is managing from behind. Simon Sinek has that book Leaders Eat Last, and I know that you love
I
that
love
book
them.
because
Yep.
it's a military the military ideals
Correct.
of officers will eat last. Make sure your people eat first. And a good exercise is reflecting on management you've had in the past and say, what do I want to be like? What do I want to take from or glean off of the management that I had that was great in the past, and what do I want to avoid with management in the past that I've had bad relationships or bad run-ins with?
Mhm.
Because we can always form ourselves. I think it's wonderful. It's like a moving new schools as a teenager or going to new college. You get to be whoever you want to be. You can reformulate yourself, shed the fat that you didn't want anymore, and become the person you want. Uh, you get to practice anytime you move. So let all of these examples sink in. Think about difficult relationships you've had in the past, and maybe you're going to be in management one day, and that will be your little key or your bank to pull from and say, "No, I'm not going to do that. I remember what happened here," or "I remember I screwed this up in the past, and I want to avoid that. I'm going to do the opposite this time."
Yeah, I like it. I think that's a good place to end too. Do you want to switch over and do a little bit of personal items?
Yeah, personal items are great. I'll start again. Okay, because I feel like I'm in a good spot right now. I am convinced that I have SAD because as soon as the sun came out, my spirits are lifted.
Perfect.
My kids are would come outside and play football. And like yesterday it was like 26 degrees. I'm like, I'm not going outside, but you're not gonna be able to get me inside once it's nice weather. So it's been wonderful. I'm gonna hit a little different uh, aspect of my life that was changed. My wife asked me to cut her hair. She said,
What?
yeah, she goes, I'm willing to let you try to cut my hair.
Oh my.
Now, I've been cutting my boys' hair, and boys' hair it's difficult because I like doing fades and I like blending, and I spend a lot of time. I enjoy it. Cutting long hair is very different. I watched tons of YouTube videos from professionals about how to cut women's hair, and Mike, I did a good freaking job.
Nice.
Okay. Now, people who understand women's cuts will understand exactly what I'm saying, but I did a wet cut and I did a complete blunt cut all around. And then I did layers, Mike. I pulled the hair into a horseshoe and then I tied everything back and I did layers for her and I shaped up bangs and everything. Bro,
What
I
the
think
heck?
I missed my calling.
Man, I'm adding it to your list of potential non-clinical career paths.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Woodworking,
saying.
hairdresser,
Well,
perfect.
I like mowing as well, and
Okay.
maybe I have to.
Landscaping.
Well,
Yep.
I have to. I've got to. I'm gonna send you this fake logo that I made for myself, and it was a fake business I made up called Just a Trim, and it's a face and a hair, and it's got clippers, but it's grass on top of the guy's head,
Okay.
and it's
Nice.
you go in, you cut the people's lawn, and then you cut their hair. Just a trim.
Man, I will say landscaping's a pretty profitable business if you're, running it well.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with healthcare.
Yeah. Good to have backups. I think I'm going to talk about spring because I agree with you. I love having four seasons. And I also love that I think climate change for all the concerns with climate change, it's treating the Rust Belt, the Great Lakes areas quite well. just since my childhood, I feel like there's been this massive shift. And I think in an area like ours, where we live in upstate New York, the impact of climate change is palpable. I remember as a kid having winters where snow was piled up so high and the lake would freeze over, and just all of these very, very severe winters, entire months of January where it didn't get above freezing. And that's gone. I mean, we still get snow, and we still get a fair amount of snow, but the winter has shifted here, where now we
Hmm.
get snowstorms, where you get these high moisture events that dump a whole lot of snow, but then within a week it all melts away, and the average temp is usually in the mid 30s.
Hmm.
And the trade-off to that, I think, is that we are in Buffalo and certainly in Rochester now getting to a point where we actually have four distinct seasons. We don't have 6 months of winter followed by 3 months of summer, but rather it's lovely. So March, we had a couple days already that were in the 70s. We've had many days that are in the 50s, and just like you said, it's just so nice to get the kids outside, to get out and go for walks even when it's cold out. It's still got the air has a bit of a crisp warmth to it, and the sun is starting to peek through on more days. And there's just, I love the feeling that comes with spring when the buds start coming out. You can hear the
Hmm.
birds, you can get outside and go for walks. It's like everybody's reemerging from hibernation, and I love that.
The first day you can roll your windows down and drive with
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the best.
I love that about four seasons, though, is as you exit the season, there's kind of this transformative change of daily routine, of what things you can do. I'm going to start now working on yard work and stuff as the weather is
Yeah.
improving, and so now my weekends start shifting and looking a little bit different. So I love it. I love the transformations of each season.
Yeah, and for anybody who's listened for quite a while, that once the weather hits, I will be talking about my hammock almost every single time we get on. So,
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This is White Coats of the Round Table. If you do not follow us, consider following us and even leave us a review. If you don't like what you hear, definitely don't review us. Until next week, this is Mike and John. Everyone have a wonderful week.